Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Today I would like to discuss the various European language translations of the oldest Chinese song anthology, the Shijing, and examine how this book of songs, through its translation and recreation, bridges European and Chinese culture together. For those of you who are not familiar with Shijing, I would like to provide a brief introduction. The Shijing plays a central role in the literary history of entire Chinese culture fair. It is the oldest collection of songs and poems in China and is divided into three sections: Feng, the folk songs; Ya, the festival songs; and Song, the sacrificial songs. I deliberately say the oldest collection of songs and poems because in earlier times, songs and poems formed a unified whole. Poems were recited with or without the company of musical instruments. Today, however, the music has been lost, and only the poems have survived. The songs in Shijing were mainly created during the Western Zhou dynasty and range in subject from the previous era of the Shang dynasty. Originally, it contained more than 3,000 poems. However, Confucius, a philosopher of the Eastern Zhou dynasty, selected only 305 of them. And those 305 songs form the foundation for all European translations that we are going to talk about today. As you had already know, Shijing are divided into three categories: folk songs, festival songs, and sacrificial songs. The festival songs and sacrificial songs are art songs composed by literati. In contrast, the folk songs, which constitute the largest portion of Shijing, originate from the common people, especially farmers, and were collected annually by so-called song-collecting officials, 采诗官 in Chinese. These officials carry the instrument of the clapper bell, named muduo, in their hands, travel streets and fields, gather the songs, and later presented them before the king, to help the king better know his country. Shijing has a history of 3,000 years, but it wasn't until the 18th century that it came to the attention of the West due to political and religious rivalries in the Age of Discovery. The interaction between the West and the East has been ongoing since the establishment of the Silk Road. For a long time in the history, China has been depicted as a mysterious country at the other end of the Silk Road. 1453, the Ottomans conquered Constantinople and blocked the Silk Road. This caused the price of spices to escalate. To compensate for this loss, European countries tried to find alternative route to the east, not by land, but by sea. 1492, Christopher Columbus discovered America. 2 years later, the Treaty of Tordesillas was signed between Spain and Portugal, allowing Spain to sail west and Portugal to sail east. 1534, the Societas Jesus established. Under sponsorship of Portuguese king, numerous missionaries, including notable figures such as Matteo Ricci, Nicolas Trigaud, Johannes Streeck, and Michael Bohm, were systematically dispatched to China. The intention of the Catholic Church is quite obvious. Since the Reformation that began in 1517, the Catholic Church lost many followers throughout Europe. China, whose population at that time was approximately equal to that of all Europe, was seen as a potential place where millions of souls could be converted to the Catholic faith. Alessandro Valiano proposed in the 1570s that missionaries in the Far East should become proficient in Mandarin, as Chinese was a language of scholarship in East Asia, similar to Latin in Europe. They adopted an accommodation strategy, introducing the Catholic faith through Chinese philosophy, particularly the teachings of Confucianism. In this context, the Shijing, also known as the Book of Song, the oldest collection of Chinese poetry and one of the 5 Confucian classics, garnered the attention of missionaries. The earliest complete translation of the Shijing was rendered into Latin by Lacham in 1733. However, it remained forgotten for nearly a century until Moore rediscovered and republished it in the 1830s. A few French missionaries also produced French translations, although they covered in 18 songs in total. In 1833, Friedrich Rückert, a poet rather than a missionary, published the first German translation. He relied on Lachaume's Latin version and sought to adapt the poetry into a European context. Shijing first came to the attention of the European general public through Rückert. Rückert was a French Jesuit scholar who specialized in China, even though he never visited the country himself. Instead, he gathered notes and reports from 27 missionaries and compiled them into an encyclopedia. This four-volume collection was highly successful, translated into English as early as 1736, and remained the primary source of European knowledge about China until the late 19th century. The 8 songs collected here are mainly from the section Ya, the court hymn or festival songs, where we can read the conversation between the king and his ministers on the subject of morals, history, philosophy, and virtue. The poems chosen by Rückert deal with moral values and concept of good and evil, virtue and vice, which are found both in Occident and Orient. Presumably, Rückert pursues Matteo Ricci's accommodation strategies further, but this time in reverse, using Oriental literature to complement Western faith and moral values. 7 songs from the Shijing have also been selected in another encyclopedia to explain the concept of filial piety, the respect of children for their parents, a value that is still important today and which was already documented in the Shijing 3,000 years ago. Here is one of the interesting songs selected and translated by the French missionaries to explain the concept and to show that China, since the ancient time of the Shijing, is a nation where people put collective benefit, especially family honor or reputation, above the interests of the individual.
Ô Chongse, je t'en prie, ne viens pas dans notre hameau, ne trompe plus les branches de nos saules. Je n'oserais t'aimer, la crainte de mon père et de ma mère me retient. Mon cœur pourrait se tourner vers toi, mais puis-je oublier ce que m'ont dit mon père et ma mère? Ô Chongse, je t'en conjure, ne monte pas sur notre muraille, ne romps plus les branches de nos mûriers. Je n'oserais t'aimer, la crainte de mes frères me retient. Mon cœur pourrait se tourner vers toi, mais puis-je oublier ce que m'ont dit mes frères? Ô Chongse, je t'en supplie, n'entre pas dans notre jardin, ne romps pas les branches de nos arbres de sandales. Je n'oserais t'aimer, la crainte de mes parents me retient. Mon cœur pourrait se tourner vers toi, mais puis-je oublier ce que m'ont dit mes parents?
The French translation disregards the original structure of the Chinese song, which is divided into 3 stanzas. This tripartite forms carries a hidden significance. It mirrors the physical or emotional distance between the two lovers, either drawing them closer or pushing them farther apart, either through walls, the physical obstacles, or people, the emotional ones. The first complete translation of Shijing was made by Lachaume in 1733. Lachaume was a French Jesuit who served as an interpreter at the court of Emperor Qianlong in China between 1728 and 1767. He translated the Shijing into Latin, and this translation was later sent back to Europe. There it initially fell into obscurity and was long kept unnoticed at the Paris Observatory, until Jules Mols rediscovered and published it in 1830. However, this work is more a paraphrase than literal translation. Lachaume focused on conveying the context and largely forgave the original form and aesthetic fineness of the poems. Lachaume's dry Latin translation was revitalized by Rückert with the German soul. His poems had a Chinese tone on one hand, while on the other reflect the aesthetic of German poetry. For instance, Rückert's poems include Chinese couples marrying in a church, or mythical creature Qilin, which is translated as the Chinese unicorn. This enables us to experience a dual sense of neither nor and both and. Rückert dispenses with original division into 3 parts, Feng, Ya, Song. Instead, he organized the poems thematically, for example, into categories such as wedding songs, war songs, and festival songs. His Shijing contains a total of 335 poems, while in the Chinese original contains only 305 songs. This is because Rückert broke some of the poems down into individual pieces and combined others into new units. Guanzhou, the first song in Shijing, translated into the Hochzeitslieder, the wedding song by Rückert, is our first example of how Rückert, as a poet, put his creativity in his translation. The content of the Latin text is similar to that of the Chinese, and we can compare it with Rückert's version. Here I have presented the original Chinese text, Lachan's Latin translation, and the English translation derived from the Latin. I will introduce Rückert's translation on the next slide. For those who do not understand Chinese, you may follow along with the Latin or English translation, as they remain largely faithful to the original in content.
The Tsukio birds of watery lands, both male and female, fulfill their roles through song. With all the majesty and extraordinary virtue, a wise man delights in marrying the girl. At different heights, we watch the plant that King Sai has declared, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. The men watch over our girl, desiring her while she sleeps and wishing to take her as his wife. Not yet having obtained her, he always thinks of her when he is resting, awake, or asleep. He rolls on his bed in all directions thinking of her. Our plant is plucked here and there. The girl is full of majesty and extraordinary virtue. Kin and Che form a musical ensemble. Our plant is plucked here and there. The girl is full of majesty and extraordinary virtue. Bells and kettle drums with musical sounds refresh the ears.
The Chinese and Latin poems do not say whether the wise man marries a beautiful woman. Rückert's version, however, gives the poem a happy ending. I will now play the German original. Please read the English translation if you are not familiar with the language.
Zwei, die nur vom Tod getrennten, die auf stiller Flut entlang, Mann und Weib, zwei Spiegelenden, schweben unter Wechselsang. Die Gefährtin reich an Tugend, reich an Anmut, Sitte, Zucht, die von Schönheit strahlt und Jugend, hat ein Kluger ausgesucht. Viele Schilfen, kurz und lange, schwanken hin und her im Wind, neigen sich des Wassers Drange, wo sie aufgewachsen sind. Unsere Jungfrau zu gewinnen, wünscht im Wachen und im Traum mancher, sich mit eitlem Sinnen walzend auf des Lagers Raum. Viele sie begehret hatten, einer brach die Blum am Stiel. Wie gefällig sie sich gatten, wie mit Trommel Glockenspiel.
If we compare the 2 poems together, the characters in Rückert's poem are heavily influenced by European traits. The young man is depicted as intelligent, proactive, extrovert, and strategic. To capture the love and heart of the girl, he picks a flower and presents it to her. Picking a flower by the stem is a German idiom, serving as a metaphor for sexuality. Ultimately, the young couple joyfully marries in a church, a distinctly European motive that lacks a counterpart in the original Chinese version. In contrast, the young man in the original Chinese text is relatively introverted and reserved. He loves her, but does not press his love upon her. In the ending, whether the young man and the girl unite remains ambiguous. At the poem's conclusion, the girl resumes her work in the fields undisturbed, as though nothing has transpired. In short, Rückert's poem has a complete storyline according to the Aristotelian principle of beginning, middle, and end, while the Chinese original lacks this progressive storyline and the end remains open. To sum up, the Chinese poem conveys its message through calmness and imaginary, while Rückert's German version is characterized by action and movement. I will give you the last example of the translation of the day, 灵之子, translated as Das chinesische Einhorn, the Chinese unicorn by Rückert. As usual, we will start with the Latin translation by Lachan.
Who would not admire the creature called Qiling with his feet? Oh, wonderful apparition! The prince's children, each one of them is another Qiling. Oh, keeling with your forehead. Wonderful apparition. The prince's relatives, each one of them, is another keeling. Oh, keeling with your horn. The people of the prince's famous family, wonderful apparition. Each one of them is another keeling.
What is a keeling? Lashan offers an examination of this mythical creature in his notes. A keeling has the body of a deer, a head of a sheep, the tail of an ox, the legs of a horse, the hoofs of an ox, a single horn with a fleshy tip, and a body covered with scales. Lashan writes here that keeling has only one horn, but in fact it is more common in iconography to depict keeling with two horns and a dragon head. Although it has body parts that could be potentially dangerous, it does not use them to harm other living things. Instead, keeling has a good heart and respects all forms of life. It is often used as a metaphor, likening those in power, whether they be nobles, officers, or wealthy individuals. These powerful people may have influence, but they do not abuse their power. I will now play the German version of Rickert's poem. As you can see, the poem is much longer than the Chinese and Latin versions. It is obvious that Rickert has studied the notes of Lashan and embedded the hidden metaphorical meanings of the killing into his poem to avoid confusion for the European readers.
Das edle Tier Kieling, ein Wunder nicht gering, ist wohl ein seltenes Ding. Es trägt ein Ehrenhorn an seiner Stirne vorn, stößt doch kein Tier im Zorn. Es geht nie geschart, es geht nie gepaart, ist einzig seiner Art. O, welches Wunder von den Schönen, von allen unseres Königs Söhnen, ist jeder einzig ein Kieling. Das edle Tier Kieling, das nie ein Jäger fing, ist wohl ein Wunderding. Es trägt ein Ehrenhuf, doch nie sein Fußtritt schuf des Grasteils Weherruf. An seinem Leib vereint fünffache Farb erscheint, dass man zu träumen meint. O, welches Wunder, von Gesandten des Königstammes angestammten, ist jeder einzeln ein Kieling. Das edle Tier Kieling, einzig im Weltenring, ist wohl ein Wunderding. Es führet starken Schritt, tritt hart nicht auf damit, kein Wurm darunter litt. Es hat des Rosses Kraft, des Lammes Eigenschaft, ein Tier so musterhaft. Was kann das Wunder übertreffen? Ein jeder von des Königs Neffen, in seiner Art ist ein Kieling.
Rickert translated killing as a unicorn in the title of the poem, which I think is inappropriate. In China, the killing is a metaphor for a virtuous person who doesn't abuse their power. In Europe, however, the unicorn has a different metaphorical meaning. It is often associated with marriage and virginity. As a popular motif on carpets, it was often hung in the rooms of newly married couples to remind them of their marital vows and duties. In Christianity, the unicorn is often associated with Mary because of its association with virginity. Rickert's Shijing is not a translation, but a new creative work full of artistic freedom. He is not a missionary who is asked to write in a collective tone and is not allowed to add a personal touch. Instead, he is a poet and an artist who is not restricted. In this work, Rickert seeks to convey a deeper message. In his preface, he writes that he has discovered shared value in many of the world's poetic traditions. Behind the ambivalent traits such as near and far, bitter or ripe, soft and stiff, he perceives a universal core, the essence of human emotions such as love, hate, joy, and sorrow that bind people together regardless of time and culture. In the first poem, for example, although the image of the boy is different and even opposite in the West and the East, the motif is the same. It is about the love for the other sex, although the way it is expressed is different. In the second point of a killing, both wonder tears, killing, and unicorn are united in the quality of virtue, as they can do something but do not abuse their power. In the examples we examined today from Rickert and other missionaries, we encounter a dual experience of neither nor and both and, where diverse cultures converge into a unified whole within the poems. These translations represent an endeavor towards world poetry or world literature, standing in contrast to national literature. The notion of world poetry and world literature traces its roots back to Goethe. To him, poetry is a collective treasure of humanity. It is not something that separates one nation from the other, but something that eliminates the boundaries between them. The concept of world literature brings to mind the Greek philosophy of the one and the whole, as represented by Heraclitus, a Greek philosopher who lived at the same time as the Chinese Confucius. According to Heraclitus, every duality is fundamentally one, and every extreme holds equal value to its opposite. Confucius shared a similar idea of great unity, where everything is interconnected in harmony and unity. The concept of national literature and Sai's Orientalism serve as counterpoints to the world literature. In Sai's Orientalism, an unequal power constellation prevails in which the Occident stands above the Orient and defines it. History is made by man and woman, just as it can be made and rewritten, always with various silence and illusions, always shapes imposed and disfigurement tolerated, so that our East and our Orient become our to possess and direct. They cannot represent themselves, they must be represented. Sai's theory of Orientalism has a colonial background and is characterized by national competition. In his theory, there is a hierarchical pyramid with countries like England and France at the top and third world countries at the bottom. In Sai's Orientalism, there is a center of world, whereas in world poetry, this center is absent. National literature is the extension of Sai's Orientalism, in which each nation strives to emphasize its identity by separating itself from the other cultures. In this way, the world is divided into here and there, the familiar and foreign. For Goethe, such notions of separations, like national hatred or pride, are the lowest level of the culture. Goethe and Rückert reject the idea of national literature. Like the missionaries who adapted the strategy of accommodation in China, trying to find common ground between cultures, they regard Orient as a fresh source of inspiration, where they discover fertile ground for their poetic endeavor. In 1827, Goethe published the poetry cycle Chinesische Deutsche Jahres- und Tageszeiten, and in 1833, Rückert released his rendition of the Shijing. Through their work, the Occident and Orient forged a new unity under their pens, culminating the emergence of world literature. The Chinese anthology Shijing offers a broad overview from the everyday life of ancient Chinese people to the conversation between the king and ministers, transporting the reader to a distant temporal and spatial realm 3,000 years ago. However, it was not until the 18th century that this ancient anthology made its way to Europe, as missionaries adapted themselves to the accommodation strategy in Asia to introduce the Catholic faith through Chinese philosophy, especially the teachings of Confucianism. When the missionaries wrote their reports back to Europe, they also used this strategy in reverse, introducing Chinese culture through European culture and religion. Poets such as Goethe and Rückert followed this spirit, seeing in poetry the potential to unite rather than divide nations, where people around the globe could live in harmony rather than in conflict. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope my presentation was inspiring. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. I also welcome further discussion after this panel. My email address is provided on the PowerPoint. I look forward to your feedback and wish you a wonderful day.